directed. We see some goal where we have to do something about it, and we do it.
Hi, I'm attorney Angelo Pepa, and I am local. I was an attorney at law and still am an attorney at law. I have a BS, MA, JD. I used to be a football player in high school back when we had 740 kids in my graduating class in Newcastle. We beat everybody, okay? Then I became a football coach. Then I became a teacher and a high school administrator. And I promise to make all of that relevant to you guys in what we're about to say, because those experiences turned out to follow me out the door of my year when I graduated from law school in 1986, okay? We're talking 36 years old, trying to find customers. And the best way to find customers when you're 36 years old and get them quickly, because you have people at home that are wondering how crazy you are that you gave up a job as an assistant principal to do this, to start this dream, we recognized that getting referrals was our best way. So what happened is we started referring in the financial industry to other professionals. That's called collaboration, by the way. And the collaboration was wonderful. I could offer a comprehensive solution to a problem with another academic discipline, and that was really good. Now what happened was it was successful, and so we started doing more of it, and we started doing to other professions, and we started branching out. However, I know you're thinking two heads are better than one, and exponentially more is more, right? So, problem though, first things you have to do is you have to have the right professional members of the team. Some of those brilliant people I have met in my life basically are not team players. They wouldn't know how to work with anybody if their life depended on it. Some people just don't do well in groups. So they needed to be directed. We became experts at directing and envisioning people to do things in a corporate manner, okay? And this all worked out really well for Signature Hill professional consultants. Another funny thing happened over the years. As it became more successful, we had to build infrastructures like these wonderful people here who allow us to extend our reach and allow us to extend our communication and administration infrastructures for the sake of a team. Now, I want you to, you'll get this, I think, if you envision this. I want you to imagine there's a symphonic orchestra behind me right here, and those people walked in, every one of them are of the level of Joshua Bell himself, okay? And they walk in and they start playing their music, playing their instrument with no sheet music and no direction. Guess what? Noise, right? So everything needed a director. So we became experts at directing these recruited, like-minded professionals in multi-disciplines. And it became a wonderful idea, and then something accidental happened. I got older. And I stand at you right now a lot older than that day I was 36 years old and an attorney. And I started recognizing that there's some really neat people that I'm meeting who have messages maybe that are not necessarily in that professional realm. And so it became what it is today, ELM. ELM, education, law, and medicine. We have three distinct divisions. We believe those are the pillars of any community. And those pillars basically are going to turn into Act 48 hours soon in education, CLE hours in legal instruction, and that's what we've been doing for 25 odd years, and CMEs for the medical division. So right now, we again accidentally found people who were so amazing at presenting, and we wanted to have a common theme that we wanted. How do you unite multidisciplined people like that? Well, the basics were three. Competence, okay? Independence, okay? Work ethic, and that third one, independence, was a subset of all of them. That third one was to be integritus, okay? I'm not so sure you can even spell that word, but integritus is my way of taking integrity and making it an adjective, and integrity. Now, what's that mean? It means saying what you do and do what you say, okay, in the world of business and whatnot. So with those three guidelines, we started getting like-minded professionals in all areas and all walks of life. And now at this age, we have become community-oriented in ELM, the freedom tree. The freedom tree, as you may or may not know, in Boston, way before the Revolution, there was a tree where the patriots used to meet, and the British cut it down. So they just started growing more trees. Lafayette himself took several trees back to France when he left, and they spread all over Europe. There was a blight that hurt us in this country for elm trees, but most main streets had elm trees lining every bit of that of their main street. So the elm tree has become our icon. Knowledge is power. Power is freedom. And right now, we have very important messages that sometimes are not necessarily in the education, legal, and medical division, but we have a platform that's going to be built by some of these wonderful gentlemen in this new venue that we're working on. And we're going to go out there and we're going to give our infrastructures, their talents, their abilities to reach, and we're going to provide voice to people who have something important to say. And there can be last thing that happened, in closing, the last thing that happened was I met Al Lindsay. And I'm smiling at his wife here because she remembers when we met. When you meet Al Lindsay, you don't forget that, okay? And I didn't forget that to this day. And they probably think of me as some kind of an impassioned groupie or whatever, but he is a lawyer's lawyer. But you know what else? He's a person's person. He's a Christian's Christian, and he's a man that won't be quiet when something important needs to be said. One of the things we say in our law office that I know I've heard him say is we're going to tell the client what they need to hear, not just what they want to hear. There's an important message out there that needs to be delivered. It transcends everything from an elm tree to the biggest tree of all. And this gentleman is going to give you a passionate message about something that is so very important. And I am so honored to be able to share this gentleman, who I look up to second to none, with my new friends in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. And I would ask you to give a warm welcome to Alexander Lindsay, attorney at law. Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, there are people who are going to tell you that the divisions in our country are the worst they've ever been. But we know that's not true. There's this thing called the Civil War, or as some people like to refer to it, as the war between the states, or as one lady told me when I was in the Army in Georgia, the recent unpleasantness. What was that all about? Well, it was about slavery, but slavery had been around for several hundred years. What happened in the late 1850s and 1860 that caused this tremendous upheaval and bloodletting? What was it that caused this thing to explode? Well, there was a decision of the United States Supreme Court in 1857, one of the worst decisions that was ever made. It was called the Dred Scott decision. And in that decision, the Supreme Court stated that African Americans could not be citizens. They were not humans. It was a horrible decision, and it offended people in the North. And what really offended them is that they were supposed to enforce the fugitive slave law and participate in this institution, this terrible, terrible institution. The other thing that precipitated this divide was the election of Abraham Lincoln. What was there about this guy that made them crazy? He was not an abolitionist. He did not preach the abolition of slavery. He stated that what he was concerned about was having slavery go north of the old line on the Missouri Compromise. But many people took that position. What was there about Lincoln that made them crazy? He talked about it. He talked about slavery all the time. It started in 1854. In 1854, they repealed what was called the Missouri Compromise and what was called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Missouri Compromise stated that slavery should not go north of a line into the northern territories. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was a problem because Nebraska was north of that line. And what happened is that the people who promoted slavery as an institution thought that the people of Nebraska, they should decide. It should be up to them. And when Lincoln heard that they abolished this line, he said it was like an alarm bell went off in the night. And in 1854, he gave a speech. It started, and it's called the Peoria Speech, but it was first given in Springfield. They were going to give it at the state fair in Springfield, and it rained, and they came into the state house, and Lincoln gave his speech there. He listened to a speech that was given by Stephen Douglas, which promoted slavery. And he stood outside, listened for it word to word, and then he said he would come back the next day and address people. My wife and I went out to Springfield, and I got to tell you, I stood at the place where Lincoln stood when he heard Stephen Douglas give his speech. And he did come back the next day. And what the people heard at that time was a new Lincoln, a Lincoln they had never heard before. But this is what he said on that day at Springfield. And he was referencing, you got to understand, the idea of self-government, that Nebraska should be able to decide this issue. He said this: the doctrine of self-government is right, absolutely and eternally right, but it has no just application as here attempted. Or perhaps I should rather say that whether it has such just application depends on whether a Negro is not or is a man. If he's not a man, why in that case he who is a man may as a matter of self-government do just as he pleases with him. But if the Negro is a man, is it not to that extent a total destruction of self-government to say that he too shall not govern himself? When the white man governs himself, that is self-government. But when he governs himself and also governs another man, that is more than self-government, that is despotism. If the Negro is a man, why then my ancient faith teaches me that all men are created equal, and that there can be no moral right in connection with one man's making a slave of another. Slavery is founded in the selfishness of man's nature, opposition to it in his love of justice. When these principles are in an internal antagonism, and when brought into collision so fiercely as slavery extension brings, shocks and throes and convulsions must ceaselessly follow. Repeal the Missouri Compromise. Repeal all compromises. Repeal the Declaration of Independence itself. Repeal all past history. You still cannot repeal human nature. It still will be the abundance of a man's heart that slavery extension is wrong, and out of the abundance of his heart, his mouth will continue to speak. Lincoln not only stated that this was something that we should deal with, he said it was wrong. That was something else. You see, people didn't talk about it. We have this idea that this was a matter of great controversy, but they just wouldn't speak about it. Lincoln himself said, the problem with the slavery issue is that you can't speak about it in the North because it's not there. You can't speak about it in the South because it is there. You can't speak about it in churches because it's a political issue. You can't speak about it in political circles because it's a moral issue. You can't speak about it. The thing that made them crazy about Lincoln is he spoke about it. And what I'm asking you tonight, or this morning, is to speak about it. We must keep talking about what is the greatest moral issue of our day. And you know something? We are given an opportunity in this particular time to take a stand on this issue. And that is the issue of the termination of pregnancies, of abortion, and in my mind, the slaughtering of millions of young people. And what I'm going to tell you today is I think that is crazy. Going on with Lincoln, Lincoln not only thought that it was a problem, he said it was wrong. He talked about it. At the Cooper's Union speech in 1860, he gave a speech in front of the Cooper's Union. And it was a magnificent speech, and it probably propelled him into the Republican nomination and the presidency. And what he talked about there is once you get into the situation that the Negro, as he called him, is a man, you can't find a middle ground. See, everybody wanted to grope for a middle ground. Can't we do something to avoid this war? And Lincoln said the problem is if African Americans are people, there's no middle ground. And he said this, let us be diverted by none of these sophistical contrivances where we are so industriously plied and belabored. Contrivances such as groping for some middle ground between the right and the wrong, vain as the search for a man who should be neither a living man nor a dead man, such as a policy of don't care on a question about which all true men do care. Let us have faith that right makes might. And in that faith, let us do our duty fearlessly. Now, on January 22nd, 1973, our United States Supreme Court issued what we know as a decision of Roe v. Wade. What did Roe v. Wade do? Roe v. Wade, and I'm not going to go into all the specifics of this decision, but I will tell you what it did and what its effect was, and that's this. Roe v. Wade took something which was a crime forever, a vicious and violent crime. In the Hippocratic Oath, doctors for centuries had to take an oath that they would not administer a pessary to a woman to cause an abortion. They took this crime and they flipped it and they made it a sacred constitutional right. This is not like where we legalize marijuana or say or booze back in the Prohibition days. They're going far beyond saying legalizing it. They're saying it's protected. It's protected by our Constitution, such as freedom of speech, freedom to worship how we choose, freedom of assembly, freedom for a mother to decide to terminate her pregnancy and end that life. It's interesting. One of the people who addressed this at the time was someone who we all seem to put on a high standard, it's Mother Teresa. And here's what she said when she heard about Roe v. Wade. America needs no words from me to see how your decision in Roe v. Wade has deformed a great nation. The so-called right to abortion has pitted mothers against their children and women against men. It has sown violence and discord at the heart of the most intimate human relationships. It has aggravated the derogation of the father's role in an increasingly fatherless society. It has portrayed the greatest gift, a child, as a competitor, an intrusion, and an inconvenience. It has nominally accorded mothers unfettered dominion over the independent lives of the physically dependent sons and daughters, and in granting this unconscionable power, it has exposed many women to unjust and selfish demands from their husbands or other sexual partners. Human rights are not a privilege conferred by government. They are every human being's entitlement. By virtue of his humanity, the right to life does not depend and must not be declared to be contingent on the pleasure of anyone else, not even a parent or a sovereign. The right to life, she said. You know, many years ago, there was a poem that was written. It's called Desiderata. I don't know if any of you remember it. They actually made a hit record out of it. And it talked about how we should have a philosophy of life, but I love the way it ended. And it said, understand this, you are a child of the universe. You have a right to be here. And I think that all of us, when we look at human life, we got to say, you have a right to be here. And when someone terminates that right, it is a horrible thing. So, what is it? You see, our position on this subject, abortion, I'm sorry. It was a lawyer's error. Abortion, what is it that is important to determine? It's obviously, what is this thing? What is it? My wife provided me with these. These are models of an unborn child at 12 weeks. This is in the first semester. This is what they look like. You know, what are they? You don't know what they are? You can't tell whether it's a human being or not? Tell you what, take one of these, show it to a 3-year-old child, and they'll tell you what it is. They'll tell you what it is. It's a child. It's a baby. And yet we lawyers, we talk about, whether or not it can survive out that womb with a heartbeat and so forth. Look, we know what it is. And once you establish what it is, I'm sorry, my friends, there is no middle ground. Now, you may look back historically and wonder with the issue of slavery, what on earth were they thinking? How could they have thought that it was all right to buy and sell human beings? What was going on? You know, at the Battle of Gettysburg, an interesting incident occurred. Some Union soldiers captured some Southern soldiers, and in the process they asked them, "What are you fighting for?" And the Southern soldiers replied, "We're fighting for our rats." And the Union soldier says, "Rats? You're fighting for rats?" And he said, "No, rats." And they realized that they were fighting for their rights. What rights? It's one of the most sacred rights that exists in our Constitution, property rights. You see, this is an important right guaranteed by our Constitution. But you see, there was a complication. And the complication is the property happened to be human beings. And so consequently, we have a situation where one person's right supersedes another. You know, there was I looked up this word, I have to describe it. There's a thing that occurs in bridge, and I don't play bridge, but one card trumps another, and I hesitated to use that word because it takes on a different meaning in this day and age. But you see, the right of freedom as a slave trumps the property right. Do you get that? And when we talk about this issue, the issue we're talking about today, abortion, a person has an absolute right to do with their body as they please. We all know that with all this vaccination controversy, we say, I don't have to be vaccinated. I should be able to do with my body what I want. And there's a lot of truth to that. But there's a complication when there's another body. And that body, the right to life of that body, trumps your right to do with your body what you wish. When there's another person involved, your rights are limited. One of the most simple statements about what we do or what our rights are and what freedom is was made by Oliver Wendell Holmes, a Supreme Court justice in the 1920s, when he said this: "My freedom to swing my arm ends where the other man's nose begins." And what that means is my freedom to do with my body ends when I'm going to terminate the life of another human body. Now, if this is, as I'm positing to you, a human life, if these are human lives, they must be protected. You see, the highest function of government is to protect our weakest people from the strong. Because you see, the strong people don't always act in the best interests of the weak people. And so they must be protected. And I would say this, and following up on that, any society, the worth of any society, is measured by how that society treats its weakest members. Now, our legal system, the problem with this, because the legal system knows, what are we going to do? We've got human beings, but we have this sacred constitutional right to terminate the pregnancy. What do we do with the legal system? Well, our legal system is schizophrenic. It doesn't know quite what to do with this. Let me read you something. Hope it's all right to read you things. This is Crimes and Offenses in Pennsylvania. Listen to this. First-degree murder of an unborn child This is in 18 Purton, section 2604. A criminal homicide of an unborn child constitutes first-degree murder of an unborn child when it is committed by an intentional killing. It is first-degree murder to intentionally kill an unborn child. Sounds logical. But wait. In section 2608, it says this. Nothing in this chapter shall impose criminal liability for acts committed during any abortion or attempted abortion, whether lawful or unlawful, in which the pregnant woman cooperated and consented. So, on one hand, our legal system tells us that this is a serious crime, the most serious crime we have. It's first-degree murder. And it goes on to tell us how the sentencing goes. Under this section, first-degree murder carries a life sentence without parole. The death penalty is ruled out in this particular section, the killing of an unborn child. But it's life in prison without parole. You know, there's a myth out there. A lot of people think that people in Pennsylvania who are convicted of first-degree murder get sentenced to life, but they really get out. No, they don't get out. They come out in a box. That's what Pennsylvania law says. So we're saying it's the most serious crime we have in our quiver of crimes. Oh, mother consented? Oh, okay. It's nothing. Folks, that is crazy. That's crazy. But it is the situation where people will not recognize the humanity of these little people. I had an interesting situation that occurred in our neighborhood. I live in Buffalo Township, Butler County, Pennsylvania. An incident occurred back in 2007. A 25-year-old woman who obviously was very mentally unstable, delivered a baby in the game room in the basement of her parents' home. And while the baby came out and the umbilical cord was still attached, she stabbed the baby in the neck and killed the baby. And she was prosecuted for first-degree murder. The district attorney sought the death penalty. Let me explain something. People are advocating aborting people right up to the moment of birth. How do you do that? Well, you do it with a process which is called dilation and extraction, commonly called a partial birth abortion. That's the only way you can do it because the baby's too big. And the process is too grisly to even talk about. I don't want to get into that here. It's just awful. Medical professionals are supposed to perform it when we're going to perform these procedures up until the moment that the baby is born. Now, what happened to this woman? She was prosecuted for first-degree murder. She had a lawyer that made a deal for her, and the deal is that she would plead guilty to third-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 90 months, or approximately 8 years, in prison, which she served. Now, when you have a legal system that says that this obviously deranged woman who killed her child could be eligible for the death penalty, and yet the same legal system says that if a doctor performs this with a mother's consent, it's not punishable. It is a sacred constitutional right. You have a legal system which has simply lost its mind. I want to talk about dogs. I think we all like dogs. You know, dogs apparently have the capacity to read the emotions of human beings. That's the reason we like them. Their little ears perk up, but they look at us and they follow us. They're great companions. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, they are dogs. I want to read you a news story. This is a news story that came out of California. On Thursday, April 18th, surveillance cameras captured video of a woman throwing 7-day-old puppies in a dumpster near Coachella in the heat of the California desert. The puppies were found by a man rummaging through the trash who put them next to a storefront where they were later rescued by a different Good Samaritan. Luckily, the puppies survived the incident, but law enforcement still sought out the woman who left the tiny creatures to die. According to the Los Angeles Times, a woman named Deborah Sue Colwell was arrested at her home on Monday by officers from the Riverside County Department of Animal Services after they reviewed the surveillance footage. When they searched the premises, they reportedly found an additional 38 dogs living on the property, which was described as rundown and dirty. There is no excuse for dumping puppies, Riverside County Animal Services Commander Chris Meyer said in a statement, especially in today's age when we or other shelters would be willing to get these animals to foster parents or rescue partners. This was a shameful act. I don't necessarily disagree with that. This woman was eventually sentenced to 36 months probation and 120 days in jail for what happened with the dogs. Now, what would have happened if what was found in the dumpster were aborted young babies? What would have happened to that person? Nothing. Because you see, it would merely be an exercise of this sacred constitutional right that's been created by Roe v. Wade. I like dogs. But would you suggest, when you're a society that values the life of 6 puppies more than you value the life of human beings, you are a society which has lost its mind? Now, I am a criminal defense attorney. And I'm somewhat of an anomaly among criminal defense attorneys because I'm what's considered a conservative Republican. Ain't many of those that work those two together, but I like it. I feel comfortable in that particular environment. People who know where I stand on abortion, that it's a killing of an innocent human being, will often confront me. Well, Mr. I don't like killing, where do you stand on the death penalty? And of course my response is, I'm against the death penalty. I'm against it. And they say, well, at least you're consistent. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, there is nothing consistent about my position on the death penalty and my position on the issue of abortion. I am against the death penalty because I have spent 50 years in the criminal justice system. A number of years, 8 years as a state and federal prosecutor, and 40-some years, I suppose, as a defense attorney. And what I have developed in those 50 years is a profound distrust of the decision-making process in our criminal courts. Innocent people are found guilty, guilty people are let go, and innocent people are pleading guilty. It's a mess. It's a mess. And the idea, you see, of perhaps sentencing someone to death when they didn't do it is a hateful thought. You know, every week or so we hear somewhere in the country someone's freed after so many years when DNA proved that they were absolutely, positively the wrong person. Shouldn't that give us some pause to think about, whoa, what's wrong with this? And of course the problem is in our legal system is defense attorneys do not defend, prosecutors do not ethically prosecute, judges don't do their job. The worst thing is juries don't understand. Juries don't understand that the old concept, it's better than 100 guilty people go free than an innocent man go to jail or be sentenced to death. They don't understand the seriousness of the gravity of what they're doing. But I'll say this for the death penalty. At least the premise of the death penalty is the person who's sentenced to death did something, and it was really bad. That's the theory behind the death penalty. They committed a crime. And at least they receive what we call due process, however perverted as I'm suggesting it is. And at least with a death penalty, there's this concept of, quote, reasonable doubt. So, what about these people? What about these people? What did they do to deserve the death penalty? Well, they weren't wanted. They weren't wanted. And so we kill them. The thing about not being wanted, by the way, is a lie. There are thousands of people who are unable to have children that would love to adopt. We've got these people going to foreign countries to adopt children. We've got them adopting all sorts of things. We have people, I have cases, I'm involved in investigations where people are trying to pay off public officials to be able to get babies. They're wanted. But even if they weren't wanted, think of that. Think of that. They weren't wanted. So they get the death penalty. That is their crime. Speaking of the death penalty, I'd like to read you something. I hope you don't mind me reading. I really like this stuff. This is a statement made by Frederick Aiken. Frederick Aiken was a young lawyer who defended Mary Surratt after the Lincoln assassination. If you recall, there was one woman involved. She owned the boarding house where the conspiracy to kill Lincoln was supposedly hatched. And Frederick Aiken was a young lawyer who was appointed to defend her. And he gave an impassioned closing argument in favor of Mary Surratt, who was the first woman who was ever executed on a federal case. And this is what he said. And when you listen to what I'm going to tell you, I want you to think of what I'm saying. Frederick Aiken made this statement in a death penalty case. But I want you to listen to what I'm saying and apply it to the unborn child. For the lawyer, as well as the soldier, there is an equally pleasant duty, an equally imperative command. That duty is to shelter from injustice and wrong the innocent, to protect the weak from oppression, and to rally at all times and on all occasions when necessity demands it to the special defense of those whom nature, custom, or circumstance may have placed in dependence upon our strength, honor, and cherishing regard. That command emanates and reaches each class from the same authoritative and omnipotent source. It comes from a superior whose right to command none dare question and none dare disobey. In this command, there is nothing of the lex talionis, which nearly 2,000 years ago nailed to the cross its divine author. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do you even so unto them, for this is the law and the prophets. God has not only given us life, but he has filled the world with everything to make life desirable. And when we sit down to determine the taking away of that which we did not give, and which, when once taken, we cannot restore, we consider a subject the most solemn and momentous within the range of human thought and human action. I have had people that have argued with me, well, you're against abortion, but what future would this child have if he's allowed to go to full-term abortion? What would his future be? And the answer is, I have no idea. I don't know what future the child would have. You know, it's interesting. See, I said this, you can't predict the future. I got to thinking about something. There used to be a magazine, maybe some of you remember, called the Saturday Evening Post. The Saturday Evening Post, it came every week, and they had Norman Rockwell covers on it, if you recall. And I remember as a kid looking through because the cartoons, I liked the cartoons. They had great cartoons. But I remember one article that I read when I was 13, 14. And the article was this. It was about a man who was saying that because of his view of the population explosion, that everybody should be limited to having no more or something like 1.8 child per couple. Limit this. And it was a very cogent and strong argument. The next week, there was a letter to the editor. It was very simple. And what the letter to the editor was, if this plan had been in place in the early 1700s, Benjamin Franklin, who was the 15th child in his particular family, would never have born, and your stupid magazine would have never been started. And of course, you know, the Saturday Evening Post went its way. Adios, amigo. So I don't know. You cannot predict what the future will be for any child. And I can give you things that you would be astounded. The dire circumstances. You know, it's interesting. In Newcastle, 2 nights ago, they had a number of gubernatorial and Senate candidates. And one thing almost common, all of these candidates came from poverty and terrible situations, and they all raised them. It was actually very inspiring. You cannot predict what the future of any one of these children would be. But I can predict this. I can predict this with absolute accuracy, that these children who were the product of terminated pregnancies will never know the joy of seeing a beautiful sunset or a beautiful sunrise. They will never know the thrill of that first job when you're hired. They will never know what the joy is to find a loving partner and start a relationship and a family. Do you remember what it's like when you have that first child and you bring it home from the hospital? It's like angels are surrounding you. They will never know what it's like to be at their son's graduation at high school or college. They will never know what it's like to see their children develop relationships. They will never dance with their daughter at their daughter's marriage. They will never be able to sit down at a Thanksgiving dinner and give thanks to God for the family that's in front of them. They will never know that. They will never know what it's like to be old age with a partner that you've spent 50, 60 years with. They will never know any of that. I can predict that with absolute certainty. They will never enjoy those special things that make this otherwise difficult and stressful life so very, very tolerable. I've heard people say this, where you talk about abortions and you're not going to stop them, you know. You're not going to stop them. They're going to go on anyway. And the answer is yeah. We've passed laws against rapes. They're still going on. We've passed laws against murders. They're still going on. But the thing about it is, it's a statement of what we value and how we value human life. You know, people are talking now. It's a thing that they're doing experimentation with unborn children at the University of Pittsburgh. They're doing experimenting with these. And people are surprised. You're surprised? Once you establish that that is not a human being, that is no human rights, well, you can do anything you want with them. Don't you remember Auschwitz? Don't you remember when subhumans were subjected to medical experimentation and killed in the concentration camps of Nazi Germany? Of course they're going to do this. They're going to experiment with them. They're going to harvest their organs. And you know what they will do without any morality? They're going to start to raise children for the purpose of killing them and harvesting their organs. Because that's what evil people do. And my friends, evil people are part of the picture. And our role is to protect those people from those forces, those natural human inclinations. I'd like to make a distinction. That's my water here. I like to make a distinction between what I believe and what I know. I believe this. I'm a Christian. And so I believe that Jesus Christ was God and he walked among us. I'm a Swedenborgian. And I believe that the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg are the truth. I believe those things. And if you suggest to me, well, I think you're wrong, I would suggest to you, you certainly entitled your opinion. Your opinion is certainly as good as mine. I would suggest to you it's fine that you have an opposite opinion about what I believe. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I know this. There was an architect. There was someone who planned this creation. I know that for a fact. When you think about just the human body, the systems, the endocrine system, the nervous system, how complicated it is. You know, I'm into this thing. I got into this thing about the planning of the human body when I had a case back in the 1990s. It was a very, very prominent case, and it involved police officers involved with a fracas with a young man who was in his 30s, and in the course of the fracas, he died. The police officers were charged with murder, and I represented one of the police officers. The theory is that these police officers got on top of this young man and in effect suffocated him by what they called compression. Well, we had to refute that. And so what we did is that we got a pathologist out of Seattle, Washington, very prominent, to testify as to what his theory was of what happened. He said, no, it wasn't compression. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, he had a damaged heart to begin with. And in addition to that, he was in a fight or flight syndrome. What that meant was his whole body was attempting to fight these police officers. And what that meant is his heart was being bathed with adrenaline. And the adrenaline was telling the heart to say, the various parts of the body need oxygen, speed up, speed up. He said, but then there was this. You see, part of the process was, while this was going on, there was a police officer who had what they call an asp. It's like a baton, and it was pressed against his neck while this was going on, while he was fighting. He said, see, the problem is this. On the neck, there's the arteries here, there's a Y here. And then he said this. He said that, you see, the guy that designed this thing knew what he was doing. And he said, there is this artery in the side of the neck, and in the middle of the V, there's a nerve ganglion. And this nerve ganglion monitors the blood pressure in the brain. And what it does, you see, if the blood pressure gets too high in the brain, the vessels start to pop, you have a stroke, you know what happens. So he says, here's what was happening with this young man. He got into the fight, he had a weak heart, and his body was bathing his heart with adrenaline, and it was going so fast. And then meanwhile, it's getting a signal from the nerve, slow down. There's too much pressure in the brain. So the heart was getting two signals, and it just went into afibrillation, and he died. Now, what I most remembered about that whole conversation, by the way, my client was acquitted, was his statement, the guy that designed this thing really knew what he was doing. And since that time, I'm constantly made aware of the guy who designed this thing knew what he was doing. For example, recently, I'm a criminal defense attorney, we deal with an issue called fingerprints. And in dealing with this particular issue, the report didn't call them fingerprints. It called them friction ridges. Friction ridges. Oh, I get it. The guy that designed this thing knew that there would be a time when I would be on a patio in the back of my house. It'd be a hot summer day. I'd be drinking iced tea. It was covered with condensation. It would slip out of my hand, smash on the car, spoil the moment. And so he gave me friction ridges. You know something that's interesting, what I got into recently was the position of our ears. You know how the cow's ears and the horse's ears are up here. Dogs, remember the dogs and so forth I talked about. But ours are not. They're on either side of our head. You know why that is? You know why the guy that designed this thing put them there? Here's the thing. Sound travels much slower than light. You see off in the distance a puff of smoke, and then a second or two later you hear the bang. It travels that slow. Now here's the deal. What do we do when we're trying to figure out the direction of a sound? We go like this, don't we? It's instinctual. Why are we doing that? We're doing that because you see, your brain is so sensitive that it can detect the time it hits one ear and then the other. And so what happens is we're turning our head one way or the other until it hits both ears at the same time. And that's the direction it's coming from. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? But of all the things that are amazing, this concept known as DNA, the idea that we have a sperm and an egg, and they unite at that moment of conception, and a whole new being is created. And the DNA goes to both the mother and the father. You know, people say it's all evolution. It's not made with any guide or whatever. Please. The whole concept of the two genders, the two sexes, it's essential to evolution. You see, it's the breeding that changes things. It's that evolution. Ain't no male and female, there ain't no evolution, folks. And where do you think that came from? The guy that designed this thing. The guy that designed this thing. You know, recently we had a big thing in our family. My wife, who's sitting here, learned she could make a reasonable claim that she is one of the 30,000 Americans that descend from the Native American princess Pocahontas. And we're all excited about this. You know, Pocahontas' real name was Mayoka. Pocahontas was a nickname, but I would say at our house, she's great-grandma. But the thing that I got to tell you that's so thrilling about that, I know if that's true, and she can make a reasonable claim that it is true, that when I look at my children, you know, there will come a day when the technology can actually ferret out. There will be traces of the most prominent Native American woman in the history of our country in every cell in their body. An accident? A spin of the roulette wheel? Chance? All happen? Please. When you tell me that you don't agree with me on my religious beliefs, I say, well, my reaction is that's fine. When you tell me that there is no planner, that there is no creator, that there is no designer, I don't suggest to you that I disagree with you. I suggest to you that you are insane, that there has to be a planner. And when we think about this planner, when we think about the guy that designed this thing, what a sweetheart he, she, it, whatever you perceive it to be, is. Because there's so many things in this world, in this life, to give us human beings pleasure. Pleasure. Think of what we eat. You know, I used to raise on a farm. We would feed our cows some hay and some chop, and to dress it up, we'd put a little, corn silage with it. Hey, molasses in it. They went nuts. But think about what we eat. Think about the textures and the temperatures and the flavors. Hot, cold, all of those things that make eating so delightful. Think about what we listen to, the tonalities. Think about music and how much pleasure music gives us, what we hear. I think it was Ray Charles that said there are really only two kinds of music, good music and bad music. And in any event, I often think about how beautiful it is that music, movies. You take the music out of movies. They're not the same. It means so much to have that music. Think of what we see, the colors, the tones, all of those things that give us pleasure. But when we're talking about what gives us pleasure, is it not true that the thing that gives us the most pleasure is other human beings? And the reason they give us so much pleasure is because they are so different from us. Each one of us brings something to the table. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said that every man in some fashion is my superior, no matter how humble. I have a lot of people that are superior to me. I can't do anything mechanical. I don't have any patience. I'm always astounded how people can ferret out things mechanical to do, because I can't do it. But there are people that can. But think about the people surround us and what they do, and how every one of them brings something to the table. If you have a choir of 100 people, remove one voice, and the sound is different. When we think of that choir, the big choir, all of those voices working in harmony. And when I think about that, many of us at this time of year, just past Christmas, we watch the movie It's a Wonderful Life. And at the end, if you remember, what happened is that George Bailey was going to take his own life. And a guardian angel, Clarence, comes, and he gives him, what can he do? Gives him a wish. He says, I wished I was never born. Clarence said, oh, I could work with that. And he goes back and he shows him what the town was like if he were never born. And they wind up at a cemetery. And while they're at the cemetery, they look down and they see a tombstone. And on the tombstone is his younger brother, Harry Bailey, who died when he was 8 years old. And George Bailey says to Clarence, that can't be. He just won the Congressional Medal of Honor because he saved a troop transport. He was a pilot. Clarence said, no, he died when he was 8 because you weren't there. You weren't there to save him. You were never born. And all of those people on the troop ship died because Harry Bailey wasn't there to save them because you weren't there to save Harry. And what we're talking about is a tremendous hole that's been left when people don't get born. You know, statistically, since January 22nd, 1973, apparently 63 million people have had their lives ended before they were born. I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about how different our society would be, how different our country would be. Think of all those mothers and fathers that never were born. Think of the firemen and police officers that never were born. Think of all the political leaders, the people who could have established world peace who never were born. Think of the scientists who could have solved world hunger, climate change, could have done all of these things, who never were born. They never were born. And think about how much different our world would have been if those 63 million people had been born. You know, the worst thing about the abortion issue is the lies. The lies. When we say that this is nothing but a clump of cells and it's not a human life, that's a lie. When we say that these are unwanted people, it is a lie. When we say that this is a woman's health issue, it is a lie. And most of all, when we say that what we're killing is not a human being, it's a lie. And I will tell you this, my friends, to borrow a phrase from a recent docudrama, every lie we tell and every lie that people like you and me tolerate builds up a debt to the truth. And sooner or later, my friends, that debt will come due, and it will be paid. You know, with regard to Roe v. Wade, many people say that it's simply a political decision. The composition of the Supreme Court is such that it'll change and it'll go back, that it doesn't have any real firm basis whether we repeal it or whatever we do. You know, the thing is going to change it. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, it's because of the composition of the court. And, you know, maybe they could impeach these pro-life Supreme Court justices. You know, impeachment, they've gotten pretty good at that. They just like to bring it up a lot. Well, let me suggest something to you. I would hope that each and every one of you will speak out about this crime. Will speak to it. You know, when I went to my Swedenborgian school, there was above the blackboard a quote from Edmund Burke. All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And what I'm asking, speak out about this. Speak about it. Talk about it. You know, I suppose you can impeach a pro-life Supreme Court justice. You can impeach all Supreme Court justices, and yes, you can impeach a pro-life president of the United States. But you cannot impeach what is in our minds and in our hearts. And from the abundance of our hearts, our mouths should continue to speak. Thank you very much.
One of the ways that we promoted this wonderful talk was a fire in the hold of the ship of state, something that's smoldering in our country. I think that we can recognize that something is smoldering in our country. So, and again, Al's references, historical references, are so amazing. That idea that they could support the legality of slavery by saying that an Afro-American person was not a person. And that's the big lie, that you can do whatever you want then, that middle ground. And we know the lies we've heard. Al just went through them. This is a quote from Lincoln's second inaugural address that I think we should hear. It's only a paraphrase for a few sentences. All knew that this interest, slavery, was somehow the cause of the war. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union even by war. While the government claimed no right to do more than restrict the territorial enlargement of this problem, neither party expected the war, the magnitude, or the duration which it has already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with or even before the conflict itself would cease. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding as the war. Both read the same Bible and prayed to the same God. Each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any man should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us not judge that we not be judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which in the providence of God must needs come, but which having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war as the woe due to those whom the offense came, the price paid for truth. Shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. And this is the haunting part that I read, Al, after I heard your presentation. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth plowed by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and every drop of blood drawn with a lash shall be paid by another drawn with this sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so it still must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous. Those people stood up and started talking about it and changed it. We need to stand up, empowered with knowledge now, and stand up. I'm 71 years old. I don't have that many left. But I'll die on this hillside if I die anyway.